It's me, Dan. I know it's been a long time since I posted a book review, but that doesn't mean I've been reading. Let me give you kind of an idea of what I've read. I've read Durini Archives by Katherine Kurtz, and I'll talk about a lot of these things separately. I've always wanted to read this little book, Logan's Run. Loved the movie, never read the book. That'll be a good review, I think. Greg Bear, War Dogs, read that. And then Michael Sullivan's Age of Myth. Then if you follow my channel, you know that I like P.G. Wodehouse. I think he's a great writer. And I read Mike and Peasmith, which I've never read before. And I read a couple of the Jeeves and Wooster novels. I think I read one of these before. There's 100 or so of these books, so it might seem like a lot, but it's probably not in the sense of his collection. And then I'm rereading this monster, Lord of the Rings, and it's the illustrated edition by, what was his name, Alan Lee. So that's a lot of fun. I'm about halfway through that. On the history side, I've been reading The Seven Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence. Very, very interesting, difficult book to read. It kind of reminds me of reading Moby Dick. I never really got through Moby Dick because it got difficult. And I read this Amarillo's Historic Wolfen District by Kristlyn Wiley, a nice little snapshot of a community in Texas and its history. But the book that I'm talking about today is also a history book. It's called Enemy at the Gates by William Craig. This is a classic in World War II history. A friend of mine recommended this to me maybe 30 years ago, and I just never had the time. I've always wanted to read it. So I finally got around to doing it, and I should have read it 30 years ago. It's really a good book. So it's considered a classic of the Battle of Stalingrad. And I think that's because it combines several layers of history. What I mean is that normally if you read a history book, you get either a very top view, the generals and the statesmen, their view, or you get the guy that's in the trench. But this book, what William Craig does is he gives you all those views, and he puts it all into a nice narrative, which means you don't get lost and you get a really good sense of the battle for Stalingrad. Now, I normally warn people if I don't think a book's appropriate for certain groups of folks. This is probably okay for high school and above, but be cautioned, it's about one of the most horrific battles in modern history. It's bloody, the violence is right in your face, and if you don't like that sort of history book, you might pass it over until you prepare yourself mentally to read that sort of human drama. And yes, I highly recommend this for history buffs, particularly those that are interested in the Second World War. If you haven't read it before, like I hadn't, don't wait 30 years like I did, go out and buy it. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the level of violence. And so this battle lasted, I think it started with August 1942 and ended about in February 1943. So what is that, like 6 months? And about 2 million people died. And it's kind of easy to throw around big numbers like that, 2 million people. So what Craig did is in his opening bit when he's talking about the battle, let's see if I can find it real quick. Here we go. He's trying to break these down in numbers so that they become more realistic. It's like saying, something costs $2 million. If you've never had $2 million, it seems like it's all the money in the world, and it also seems like it's nothing at the same time. But these are some interesting statistics I thought I'd share with y'all. The pre-war census of Stalingrad, so before the Second World War, the census said they had about 500,000 people. Now, after the battle, they did a census, and there were about 1,500 people left. Now, maybe not all those folks died, because some of them probably just didn't come back, but the vast majority of them were killed. So could you imagine a city of 500,000, and within 6 months, almost everybody in the city is dead. And it's not by a nuclear attack or anything, it's ground, hand-to-hand fighting type of stuff. He also mentions, estimates are 400,000 Germans died, 130,000 Italians, 120,000 Hungarians, 200,000 Romanians, And then, of course, the Russians, who really actually knows, they lost tons and tons of people. So it really was probably one of the most violent and significant battles in modern human history. And what I also like about this book, and I'm just kind of picking a couple of things because the book itself was good, but I like the way that Craig throws in some photos of the people that he's writing about, and also a few photos, but not too much, of Stalingrad, like maybe one dead body, troops after the war and stuff. Because what he's used those photographs for, it's really a neat trick. So you start reading the story and you're trying to imagine what's going on, you're trying to imagine the characters. And what he's doing by putting in these little groups of photos, he's focusing your imagination, which helps you get really immersed into the story. And sometimes you can forget that it's an actual thing because the story is it just flows off the page. But I think that if you read this book, you're really going to like those little hints that focus your imagination and your attention on the people that he's writing about. They're not characters. I write fiction. Everybody's characters. These are real folks, real instances. So. And that's something that's really impressive to me too, is that Craig, he was a kid during the Second World War and he was following all these stories in the newspaper, and that got him interested in history. So he wrote this book, I think in the late 60s. It was published in 73, I think the original publication date. But he traveled all through Europe and he talked to these people. He talked to people that were in the fight. He talked to the generals and the lieutenants and everybody that was still left around. He spoke with them. And he also went through German archives and Russian archives as best he could at the time. And so he got a really good first-hand account history that honestly, as a world where war is always potential, having something like this, historic account like this, is really invaluable, I think, to humanity. And we're just lucky Craig did it. So the other thing I'd like to just kind of point out is that, again, there's a couple things that just stuck out in my mind. One of them was a strange thing with General Paulus. So he was the German general in charge of the army group, 6th Army Group that went and attacked Stalingrad. And he's the only general, I suppose, I gather, in German history who lost a whole army group. But Craig is fascinated by this guy, and you can just tell by the writings and the reference to him. And he's not sure if Paulus had lost his mind and his ability to critically think, because there were points where he could have broken out of Stalingrad and gone back to Ukraine, regardless of what Hitler was saying, don't do it and whatnot. He could have saved the army group that could have fought, and would have been a different battle, different outcome maybe of the war. But he seemed to have either this blindness, willful blindness, but it was also kind of mixed with this hero worship of Hitler. He just didn't think Hitler was going to abandon him. So when Hitler would tell him something crazy like, oh yeah, we're, whatever it is, he would just go, yep, he must be doing it. I just got to wait a little bit longer and I'm going to get this help, regardless of what he was actually seeing on the battlefield. So it's interesting to me, reading that, how people delude themselves about what's going on in their lives. And you see it not just with great events like the Battle of Stalingrad, you can see that in people's lives in general. They just don't see what's going on in their own life. They're willfully blind towards it. And I found that a fascinating sub-story of this book. So when you go through and read it, tell me what you think about it, because I just, the human nature bit of that, it's really incredible. The other thing that kind of touches on that, which this is just for any military people who might be watching. If somebody ever tells you that they're going to airlift you in all the supplies you need to fight, and you're like anything larger than a company plus, you're in serious hurt, because that's never worked. And that's what happened with the German army. The Luftwaffe, or whatever that guy's name was, kept telling Hitler, yeah, I'm flying in supplies. But all his planes were getting shot down, so he never actually flew the supplies that the German army needed to survive. But Hitler thought, well, he's flying in the supplies, what's the problem? So little bit of, again, intrigue, lying to, I guess you don't want to piss off Hitler, because you know what he does. So maybe the Luftwaffe dude was lying a little bit, but hung out to dry the army and Paulus. But if anybody ever tells you that, you're in trouble. You need to start thinking about, how do I retrograde progressively? Like in, what was that, the Korean War? What was that guy's name? He was up on the, by the reservoir, and he attacked to the rear. It's this big thing. That was a horrible battle too, don't get me wrong. But he was like, yeah, you had to fight any way you went, so I just attacked to the rear and got back to my supply line. So I liked that ballsy comment by him, by the way. I forget his name. And then the other thing that kind of struck me, which is something to keep in mind, especially if you're ever going to the military and whatnot, there's, at the end of the battle, there is an account by an individual German soldier. And remember, it's winter and they're freezing to death, right? They've got nothing to eat, and they don't have winter clothing, they're miserable. And he's falling back through the headquarters area, and there's this warehouse full of cold weather gear. And they're stacking it up and burning it. And he's like, what the heck, man? That we were freezing, and you had a warehouse full of this stuff, and you didn't give it to us? And I think that's an interesting comment on the nature of logistics and people's inclinations. Everybody wants to arrange things in nice little pretty shelves and whatnot, and then go, look how pretty it is, isn't this cool? And they don't send necessary supplies where they're meant to go. So if you ever become a general in some sort of army or whatever, you need to keep an eye on your logistics people who want to line everything up pretty so they can go, look, now I can have an inspection, it's great, and get that stuff out of the warehouse and into the hands of the troops. That's all I'm saying, right? Because that's not the first time I've read something like that. It seems to be part of human nature when you're just dealing with log and you're distanced from the front and you're just stacking stuff in the warehouse so you can have it look nice, and you forget the intent behind it. So if you're a general or colonel or something, go to your damn warehouses every once in a while and look at it and go, why is this stuff here and why isn't it in the hands of my folks? All right? Just saying. You're supposed to learn things from history. So that was a good lesson. So there are a lot of things I like about this book. The other thing I'd like to mention, there's that movie called Enemy at the Gates, which is about the Battle of Stalingrad. But really, in this book, it's about two snipers who go after each other. There's the German colonel in the movie and the Russian, not even a recruit, I don't know what you call him. So experience against inexperience, evil against defense, that type of themes in that movie. But in this book, it's really about maybe a page and a quarter. So it's really curious to me, and I wonder now about that movie and how they did their research, because they named it after the book, so you think this was their research. But they put a whole movie out of a page and a half, so very curious to me. I'm always interested in how Hollywood takes a story and turns it into a movie. It's something that also just fascinates me in general. But in real life, the guy was a major. I don't know why they made him a colonel in the movie. These strange little changes that they make in movies just doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, it's a really violent battle. Probably, I think I said it before, one of the most important battles, if not the most important battle of the modern period, fought between the Germans and the Russians and all of their allies. Absolutely brutal. And what Craig did to capture all that in these books is just marvelous. So yes, go read Enemy at the Gates, particularly if you're a World War II buff. But if you've never read anything about military history and you're looking, you're not really sure what it's all about, if you have to read one book, this is a good book to read because it touches all those levels of leadership, good decisions, bad decisions, sacrifice and all that stuff on both sides, evil on both sides, right on both sides, all that stuff. So great book to read. And with that said, I guess I will see you all next time.